Wow, can I quote mega pastor Craig Groeschel?
Oh, yeah. I love Craig.
Craig Groeschel says that people would rather follow a leader that's real than one that's always right. Play the music.
What is up, friends? Welcome back to the Deconstruction Zone. Sadie, we're back 2 consecutive weeks.
Yeah, 2 in a row. So far, so good.
We haven't been canceled. You didn't quit.
Nothing's been released yet.
Nothing's been released yet, but the audience doesn't know that.
Yeah.
They get it in real time.
They do now.
Behind the curtain, as they say. Well, so you and I, we talked a little bit like, well, what do we want to do? What do we want to talk about? And our unique lens is we're both pastors. We both work at the Well, which brings unique things to deconstruction. I think we can talk to deconstruction. We both experience it in our own ways. But one thing you and I talked about as we left recording last week is like we probably have a unique vantage point in that we both are big advocates for deconstruction, but we've probably either intentionally, hopefully not intentionally, but unintentionally perhaps, harmed people in their deconstruction because of our blind spots. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that could be kind of a fun episode. I don't know how long we'll go for, but I thought maybe talking about some of our blind spots in deconstruction.
Yeah. Well, I think because it's an interesting position to have been in, like having gone through that, but now being on the other side, sometimes, I don't know. Do you find yourself trying to rush people toward like, oh yeah, everything's happy now. Like, oh, just get through it. The deconstruction aspect of things. That's
a little bit.
My first thought.
Yeah, like we'll say like the journey with Emily is a great example. Like at no point was I like, hey, we need to hurry this along. And I had friends and pastors and concerned people being like, hey, like you need to get her reconstructed. And other people that I've had conversations with the deconstruction, that's their fear of what I'm going to try to get them to do, but also what those around them like, hey, when is this person going to come back to Jesus?
Dang.
And I think it's interesting. Like I never really felt that tension, but I also do really firmly and deeply believe that like Jesus matters and Jesus transforms lives and all that stuff. And so like for me, I'm like, I really want you to get there, but I've never really felt this huge, like how an evangelical would feel this need to convert someone so they don't go to hell. So it's like every second, every moment, every day matters. I don't feel that same level of like tension of like I got to do this really quick and now, because if I don't, their salvation's up for grabs.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe that might be like the second half of our conversation as like to kind of pull it back and be like, oh, maybe these are the things that we have learned that we have done wrong as pastoring people who a large portion of the congregation and audience are deconstructing. Like these are things that we've done wrong versus like this is how we try to redeem it, which is
right.
What I think you're kind of pointing at. Like,
yeah, I think so. Yeah. So I was thinking about this, like, cause you're more, I don't know, like you deconstructed to some degree, but you had for sure more recent church hurt than I had. And had like maybe I'm never going back to church and you never told that story in the podcast. And so I would say maybe open up with that story, but I would be interested to know, like, do you see any sort of like tension between that? Like you were on the side that's like, I don't know if I'll ever work in a church again. And now you're back in a church. And do you ever see yourself like rushing people along? Do you see yourself slow playing it? Do you see like, oh man, I've joined the other team and I didn't even know that? Like the team of like, I work at a church. Like not like we're the bad guys, but like you've switched and like, oh shit, like I'm on the other side now. Like, so maybe tell your story a little bit of like some of your past church hurt. You don't have to get into all of it, but like why you were like, I'm never working at a church again, just because I think that story is really interesting. And then maybe compare it to like where you feel like you are now, because you walk with a lot of people that are atheist, agnostic, or deconstructing Christians. Like you have a lot of those people in your friend group. And so I imagine just by virtue of sitting in the seat of church leadership, like that changes your perspective or maybe how you interact with people. Yeah.
And there's a lot to go off from there. And I want to get into that, but I'll back up a little bit and do a 30,000 foot version of the bad stuff that's happened to me in churches, which could be its own podcast, not just episode podcast.
Yeah. I like how we're laptop podcast now.
Oh yeah. Well, you gave me topics ahead of time, so I had time to jot down some thoughts.
I love that. You're so much pre-production. I love that.
Thanks. Well, Yeah, it's fun. It gives me something to do on a Monday too.
Yeah.
It's now a recurring event on my Monday calendar is podcast prep. So
I like that.
Yeah.
All right, into the story.
Into the story. We're waiting for my Adderall to kick in, if we're honest.
So we'll start recording an hour later next week.
Right. No. I'll just wake up an hour earlier, take the Adderall, go back to bed, and then wake up when it starts working.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
So the part in my life, the era in my life when I did this deconstructing work was a lot in my undergrad in college because I was learning new things, reading new authors, etc. And so it was kind of in my the stage of my life where I was doing a lot of internships where I was starting to learn like what it actually looks like to work on a church staff, kind of seeing the soft underbelly, if you will.
Yeah.
And so my first internship, I got fired and it was not my fault. And
how long into working did you get fired?
A few months. It was like a semester long internship and all my shit went down in like November.
Yeah. And this was your first one. So like you jump into church work and months later you're fired. And so that like has already set you off on like a interesting path.
Yep. And I don't like necessarily, could be a different podcast episode to go through all of that.
Yeah.
But like what happened was not my fault and I didn't realize that at the time.
Yeah.
And then so I did an internship out in New Hampshire. Luckily, nothing really bad happened there.
Okay.
And then came back, and then I was doing a residency at a mega church in Illinois, and like the master's degree level of an internship. So I was getting my master's in doing that. And so a few months into that internship, they realized that I'm affirming of the gay community. Mm-hmm. And it was just like, it was a long period of like them trying to figure out what to do with that.
Yeah.
But as they're figuring out what to do with that, I am just getting like a whole bunch of mixed messages and like no one's agreed with like what to do. So at first they like asked me to not lead at this worship night that I was supposed to lead at, and
like a reoccurring thing or like a one-off that
it was a one-off, but they like wouldn't tell me why.
Okay.
Or they like lied to me why. I don't know. They were just like, oh, we don't need you.
Okay.
Like, oh, okay. I'm leading a few songs, but whatever. And then time went on and I think other of my views started to like pile on. So I also tried to make a podcast episode about kind of gender roles, and the worship pastor did not like that. But I was so accommodating. I was always trying to I was offering to delete podcast episodes. I was offering to like not do the podcast at all. But what it ended up being, they decided in February, and my time was going to last through June. They decided in February that because I'm on staff, and then maybe this will lead to some interesting conversations, like because I'm on staff.
Yeah.
I had to align with their beliefs. And so they said that because of that, I'm no longer permitted to lead vocally, like with a microphone. So from May through June, I just played instruments on stage. Also wild. June came along and I had already decided that I decided before even in February that I was going to get a non-church job and just stay so I could be their volunteer. Like that's how much I was into this, and my community was there, like all of my friends. Yeah,
you were invested in.
I was invested, and
it wasn't just like you wanted the job.
Right,
like, these are my people.
Yeah, I was willing to do my job for free, essentially. I mean, I wouldn't have done like the planning and stuff, but so summer came around, and I just was like, hey. I remember how we talked about that. Like, can I sing again? They said, give us the summer to just experience you as a volunteer. And I was like, that's kind of weird. I'm going to still be prepared, still do my best, whatever.
Right.
And then August came along and I was like, hey, just checking in. And I'm like 3 months into my lease that I'd signed. I'm doing a full-time job that I'm not like qualified for education wise. And sweet. But it paid the bills. And then they told me that as long as I have this view of being pro the LGBTQ community, I'll never lead worship on their stage again. And so finally I was like, okay, I think with that, I'm going to walk away.
Yeah. That's a lot.
Yeah.
I do want to get into the comparison because you even teased this, like they made the alignment with beliefs and the switching staff. But did they ever give you because I'm always interested in how churches handle deconstruction.
Right.
Did they ever give you a pathway to have that conversation? Was it kind of like, was it if you change your belief, you can come back? Or was it like, we just kind of assume you won't? And so they didn't like create this, like how much relationship and conversation were you in with them about those beliefs? Because my understanding of it.
Not a lot.
Yeah. My understanding is like they heard your podcast or someone did, it flagged this. And then it was kind of like, Sadie believes this, she's out. But was there any sort of like, let's talk about why you believe this, or let's talk through this, or let's even try to like on their side correct you? Like was there any of that kind of stuff going on?
They briefly mentioned putting in that work, but then never did.
Okay.
Yeah, they're like, and if you want to have a conversation about the beliefs, we can. But also, I was wise enough to that point to know that like they're not going to change my mind, and I'm not going to change theirs.
Yeah.
Because I had previously held that belief, I know everything that they're going to say. And it's not going to be surprising, and it's not going to be compelling to change my mind.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you've switched. And so it's like, it's the same thing I tell the people like when...
In the comments.
Yeah, right. And one of the reasons, like if I'm ever debating someone, I argue the other side because I want to know what they're going to say. And so sometimes I'll try to defend beliefs I don't believe in so that I can like know better what people are going to say. And it's like you weren't even pretending. You're like, I knew these beliefs inside and out. Mm-hmm. How high up did it go? Did like you talk to the lead pastor? Was it like the department head? Like who were you having these conversations with?
I did talk to the executive pastor, which to set the scene, like there are over 100 people on staff.
Right.
So the executive pastor, his role was to kind of like be the boss aspect.
Yeah.
So that the lead pastor didn't also have to be the boss.
Right.
So I did have conversations with the executive pastor, and he made it sound like, but this is where the disconnect happened. The executive pastor was like, if you work hard, like I see that you still want to stay here and volunteer. Like, I think that's great. Like if you work hard, who's to say that like later down the road, you might like be able to sing again. Like he told me that. And I don't think that he was like doing that with ill intent, but he was just wrong.
Yeah. He was like, he's far enough removed from it too. Yeah. It's like, I do think
like,
it's funny. Like
even a job position, like years down the road. And I was like, whoa, that's a lot, sir. But
yeah, I think it's funny the delineation of like singing being this magical thing too. Like I think it's just funny to me. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can get it from some like because a church wouldn't let someone preach that didn't align with their beliefs, maybe. But it's like singing. It's like the songs are like pre-written.
The songs are pre-done or pre-written. There's nothing about being anti-gay or pro-gay in the songs because
right.
Thank God.
So before we shift to Sadie, church staff, Sadie, what were your, like if you could pick 3 to 5 emotions or feelings or thoughts about where you were and how you'd classify your understanding of deconstruction, your understanding of the pain, the frustration, like all of that kind of stuff, like where were you and how would you describe that season before we kind of transition to now church staff, Pastor Sadie?
Yeah, I think I had deconstructed the doctrine, but I just didn't realize that it would be such a big deal to churches that I like believe certain things. Like I thought it would be fine if I just didn't like, I don't know, go to a pride parade or.
Yeah. To you, like to use the word some churches, you thought it was like a secondary issue probably, right?
Yeah.
Like you were like, this isn't a thing that's going to prevent me.
Right.
Like I believe in Jesus. I believe all these things you sign.
Yeah.
You would probably like you could probably sign the doctrinal statement. Yeah, almost all the way through.
I did. I squinted my eyes a little bit, but I did sign it.
That's funny. But for most part, you were like, this isn't a deal breaker from your perspective,
right? Because it wasn't a deal breaker as me to someone who was affirming. It wasn't. Well,
yeah, you're like, I can exist in this space and still be fully me and love gay people, and you were surprised.
So I thought
I bet you. I mean, we don't need to go down that, but I bet you could have. Like, I know a lot of affirming people in more conservative church spaces that it's like the church and the community and the theology matter, and like I differ on this thing, and it's like I bet you could have existed there longer than you think. There are certain things that have since spiraled in that community, but so using that community not as the example, but
don't research too much.
but yeah, I'm always in some ways I'm like proud of and surprised and encouraged by the people that like stick it out in those hard situations.
Yeah.
And I would say, like, I think you probably could have done that because for you it was a human rights and character of God issue, not a salvation issue, right? Like,
yeah, I think things would have. It's hard because I'm so grateful for the people that are at that church that like need to be the shining light.
Yeah,
but couldn't be me.
Yeah. I'm sure there are people fighting the good fight there right now, right? Yeah. Okay, so now you're church staff, Sadie. You're pastor, Sadie.
Mm-hmm.
You're at the well, place you never thought you'd be. Not in terms of what you believe, but like working on a church again. You're like, I didn't think this existed. I'm not sure I wanted this. And you can feel free to get into that part of the story if you want to. But fast forward, once you get through that, like I can think of a handful of people that you've walked with that have gone through deconstruction. How have you engaged that process differently as the pastoral voice in it?
Yeah, that's really interesting because if you think about it, there's just about a year, which is not a long time,
of
between
nothing between.
Well, there's a year of August 2020, which was when I had that conversation with the worship pastors at the old church, and then a year plus 2 months later, that was when I got hired at the well.
Okay.
So that's a fairly short period of time. And it's, I guess, maybe one of the first times I'm reflecting on like kind of that aspect of it. But whenever I first got the email from Danny about like the specific job posting, I was really excited, but I was also not sure if enough time had passed.
Yeah.
Before, in order to make a leap like that again and to go into a church staff. And so I think it's looked a lot like specifically with you, I've had to be really open about like things that could be triggering, like through tears. I'm like, you didn't say anything wrong, but I just am having a reaction right now. But with my volunteers, I think a lot about just like the thought that's always permeating through my head is like, I just don't want them to have the same experience that I did.
Yeah.
And so I will fight really hard to make sure like that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So when I get to chat with people, and it's kind of a common, I don't know if there are any worship pastors out there listening, it's kind of a common like practice as someone's interested in joining to start volunteering with your team. So a large part of my job is like, I'm over all of the volunteers that have to do with music and tech and audio. From over explaining for people's sake.
Helpful
Danny's
context.
like, is this what you do all day? Anyways, and so if someone's interested in to start volunteering in my department, it's pretty normal for me to like get coffee with them and chat, and even to go over like the expectations of what it is to volunteer under my department. And those conversations, I find myself like really kind of over explaining a lot, like, because it's the tension of still like, I still need my volunteers to like be great people, and they are, like, they're wonderful people, but like I do mention to tell them like, I'm not trying to censor you, like I don't care if you're, I mean, because I've just been in situations where someone didn't make the worship team because they're living with their boyfriend. Like, I just...
Yeah, and a myriad of other reasons that we can name of things that have excluded people from volunteering or leading. Yeah.
And a lot of the volunteers that I get, they have previous volunteer experience. So it's like, I do try to point out things that that make the volunteer experience different.
Yeah.
At least from what I can control. Like I try not to... I've been in a situation where I wasn't allowed to lead songs because I wasn't like giving.
Okay. Yeah.
So I don't know, just all of that, because I have all of those experiences for me on the other side. Like on the flip side, I really try and just like help like name that, like that I've oftentimes been in the volunteer position and I've seen it just done so bad that it's like, there's a lot of like, I'm sorry. Yeah. I don't know. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting place, right? Because it's you want to be apologetic, because it's like you, and not in like a pandering way, but you want to like name that, right? And I'm talking about the collective us as the you, not just you. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, I want to make sure you feel seen, feel connected. I feel like the well actually does a lot of like corporate apologizing for things we didn't do.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we're sorry for how the church has done this, right? Like, and we try to rewrite that. We try to create space. A lot of that's based in like our theology and our ethos of like what we believe about who God is and what ministry is and why the church exists. So I would say, yeah, I affirm that in like what we do and what I do with the groups of people that I kind of interact with. It's like we say a lot of times, and if you're new to the podcast, you may not have heard us say this, and I'm not sure if I ever said it on the podcast before, but like one of our mantras is like, your seat at the table can't cost someone else theirs. And I think we believe that as far as volunteers go too. I think we do a lot to try to get people to find their passion, their gifts, their calling, and get them a space. And obviously there are certain things that could exclude someone. There's certain people that I can think of off the top of my head that like shouldn't and can't serve in certain areas. And those are kind of extreme circumstances.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about this as you were talking, like, so there's this, like, I don't want to be what I saw happen. Right. So like there were this list of things that excluded me, and I'm kind of apologetic. And I want to make sure everyone feels welcomed. All things I agree with, and like I try to do. But as I was thinking, I was like, there could be a negative to that in the sense that like you're overcorrecting. And so do you, this could be a short answer, but do you think that that's like a fear? Do you think you could overcorrect, like lower the bar too much, or be careful how I say this, but like too loose on beliefs that matter because you were held so accountable to one belief that excluded you? Like, and this is just from your personal experience, so you don't have to speak like corporately for the well, but like for you, do you see that tension of like, hey, maybe I'm overcorrecting? And do you think overcorrecting is a bad thing, or do you think what do you think about that?
I think that as time went on, I've been able to like trust my instinct a little bit more. So like when we were first kind of getting this going, when we were first building the structure, when I'm like trying to figure out how I want to do this, how do I want to onboard volunteers, it was probably more like overcorrecty in that way, and then I would work myself up. I would get nervous as the pastor coming into the conversation. But I think now, just like as I've been able to, I don't know, shepherd this group of people, like I've also gotten more comfortable in trusting myself and trusting my instincts with how that happens. And it's also just, I've gotten to know these people over 2+ years. So we're more than, I don't know, we're more than just like past, or maybe not. I almost said more than pastor congregant, but like that.
Yeah. It's an interesting.
You're friends too. I don't know.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting idea to explore. Like you talking about like you and your volunteers, you're like more than just pastor congregant is what you're saying?
Yeah. Or I don't know, just there's a level of comfort and confidence that it's taken a long time to grow, but a specific story that's like popped into my mind, I don't know how it got brought up, but we had like a chili charcuterie toward the beginning of the year, and I just like sat down at the table. There was a handful of people that were at someone's house in the church, and I just sat down and it kind of got brought up, and I was like, well, I don't believe in hell, so
yeah.
But then one of my volunteers was like, yeah, me neither. But it was a volunteer that kind of surprised me a little bit.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, cool. Yeah. There's a lot of the like, but I don't need you to believe this too, you know?
Yeah. There's an interesting, you didn't really get into this, but like there is a level of familiarity that's happened. Like I remember when we were first getting people, it's like, are you interested and can breathe? We'd love to have you be a part of this, right?
Right.
And there is a negative to that, right? There are people that were so church hurt that like they, for their own sake, not because of what happened, but like probably should have been serving, right? Like it's like they needed to heal before they really jumped in. Right. And even like, I think that there's certain volunteers I think about like that are no longer with us, or people that are no longer with the church, and by their own accord, it's like they never even really like believe any of like the base, I wouldn't even say non-negotiables, like baseline things, but we're like, hey, you care about the well, and like we created space for them. But what I've kind of found is like shared belief and vulnerability on like the conversation you had at the table, like the ability, I don't know how to, I'm trying to think of a word to classify that, but the ability to feel comfortable around people, to share like your beliefs, like those two things are what keep people around and diving deeper together. And like being able to like feel comfortable, like to say like, here are some things I agree with you on, like the Jesus thing, I'm here for that.
Yeah.
But I don't agree with this. We have people that don't believe in Jesus that come to the church, but they subscribe to other things. And I think it's trying to figure out like how we have that kind of ability to like have people around.
Yeah.
And create space to feel comfortable, but also feel challenged. Like I said this in my sermon, it was about money this last week, but it's like we should feel challenged. Like church shouldn't feel like unchallenging.
Yeah.
And that's my fear sometimes as like the overcorrection. I didn't hear you say this, but like that we won't challenge people, that like the overcorrection from our hurt is that we just create a space for
where it's like, oh, whatever, come here, it's fine.
Yeah. And it's like, and I hold probably more things tightly than you do and more things tightly than people assume I do. But I would say like creating space for people to exist and feel known.
Yeah.
And be challenged but not excluded is like a hard thing to do. And I think we're not doing it perfectly, but it's one thing I'm always like thinking about, like, how are we doing this well?
Yeah. A conversation that I've had with actually Colby Martin, who was on this podcast recently. Yeah. Yeah. Ish.
The conversation with him was
the conversation with him was on the podcast. But a way that, and this could be the overcorrecting conversation, but I have had the conversation of like when it comes to song choice, like how detail oriented should I get when it comes to going through the lyrics, like making sure if I agree with all of them, or because specific things that I'm looking for are like a lot of atonement language. Or am I going to sing a song that's like, it was literally my fault that Jesus was there dying, you know,
or even things like he, right? Yeah.
Yep. A bunch of he, like, I get asked if we're going to sing Good, Good Father. And I'm like, I think that one is we're probably not going to.
Yeah. But I know churches like, so my thing is, and this is a completely different tangent, so you don't have to go really down this, but like, as far as like songs go, lyrically and theologically, it's like, I think the cool thing we have the opportunity is like, those songs are not untouchable. So it's like, we could rearrange them both in how they sound, but like the lyrics, we could rewrite some of them to like make them fit what we believe. But also like someone asked me this, I was asked by someone like at coffee, do you believe in Jesus? Who goes to our church? And I was like, that's interesting that you wonder if I believe in Jesus or not. But I thought it was an interesting question, and we talked through it. But I had done a sermon on do non-Christians go to hell, maybe? And my answer was like too soft for them. They wanted something like a little more definitive. Yeah. So that it caused them questions. But that day, we sang some pretty heavy Jesus-y songs. Yeah. And so she asked the question, like the theology in her mind didn't always line up. And we talked through it, and I thought we had a really good conversation about it. But sometimes I think about the songs thing, and I'm like, sing, and I don't always subscribe 100% to what the words say literally, but the intent and the tone of what we're singing, like of surrender, and like Jesus is like here for us, right? And like we could all have different atonement theologies, but like the idea of this idea of generalized atonement is there, and it's like we can sing about this general idea, and it's like, well, we're singing about substitution, or we're singing about whatever, and it's like, well, maybe we don't believe that, but we believe something happened there. And that's where I hope things are challenged, both in terms of like teaching and singing. It's like, and we do this well with sermons, but I think sometimes people get weird about songs. Like, be challenged by what you sing, and like sing what you know in your heart to be true, and then be challenged and ask yourself, why don't I agree with that? I think but we sometimes think we have to come in and, just like when you were on church staff, it's like sign the doctrinal statement. That's easier. Like, here are all the things you believe. We sing exactly what it is. And this is not necessarily a right belief, but it's like, what if we created spaces where it's like we found the truth in what was being said, and we were challenged by the other stuff and started to wrestle with the in between, you know? Yeah, yeah. And luckily, no one's really like came to me and been like, you said this, and it put me back, and it immediately was the worst day of my life. Yeah, you know, I think I mostly get those conversations about me, not about you. And thank God that I don't, because I would. Yeah, but I probably am more critical of I think a lot about our lyrics when I'm singing. I'm like, I don't know if I would say it that way. Yeah. But then I'm also like, what would I say in replace of it? And like, right. But there's a way different tangent that we just started going down. Yeah. Well,
I mean, is it? Because it's an example of like us doing our best, trying to minimize damage or trying to minimize like a negative experience for people to have.
Full circle.
Yeah, full circle. Because that was one of the things that I thought about with this conversation was like, that's something that I try to manage, like thinking specifically about the people that are going to be singing these songs.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a similar vein is like I'm very cognizant of how often I'm asking people to serve.
Yeah.
And I'm like really careful with that.
Yeah, and you could see, and I don't know if you see this or not, but like I see this in other areas of volunteering, even though I'm not directly over all of them. But there are some people that are like really upset when they're asked too much, but also too little. And it's like this really interesting thing because like from our perspective, like we want to create margin where church is always fun and enjoyable and you're using your gifts and you're not getting burnt out.
Right.
But we also like people are like, well, why the hell don't they want to use my gifts?
Yep.
And it's like, well, we don't not want to. We're actually thinking about something different, and that's an interesting part.
Yeah.
And all this conversation, I do think relates sometimes back to deconstruction and other things. It's like sometimes we don't see the forest through the trees. Like we just see the thing we're really interested in, which could be like, well, they're not asking me to serve. Well, why is that? Or they're asking me only to serve once a month. Like, well,
why do they hate me?
consider that might be like a self-care thing? Like it's not we don't think you're gifted.
Right.
And
or
even
like
going back to your time,
what the need could be.
Yeah, or the need, or going back to the time the church you were at, the mega church. It's like they're asking you to serve. Like it wasn't about talent or skill. Like they were trying to, even if we would now look back retroactively and say misguidedly, they were trying to care for you.
Right.
Now it doesn't sound like they did any of the work to walk you along that.
Yeah.
Like but I would say like there would be people that I would be like, let's have a conversation about your theology. I don't know that I would pull them out of leadership, but I'd be like, let's talk about it. And like, let's figure out where you're at. That's a caring conversation. It sounds like they jumped to the serving and didn't do the caring part. But it's like at the core, whoever started that conversation, which was probably a few chains of command up, they probably were like, we should care for this person. Would be my generous thing. You were there. You know if that happened or not. I'm speculating.
I mean, if I had to choose between the executive pastor or the worship pastor, I'd choose the executive pastor.
There it is.
You know who you are.
You know who you are. He probably listens.
Jim.
Subscribe to the Patreon, executive pastor.
Yeah.
We don't have a Patreon. Well, I think we should land this plane somewhat. So do you have any kind of closing thoughts or direction you want to take us as we try to like close this out?
Oh, kind of.
Okay.
I made a list of ways that I think you've done really nice things to a person with church hurt or deconstruction. Yeah.
I'm a words of affirmation guy.
Wow.
So this is so good for me.
Or it's like examples of things that like I guess you do in your job that I think like sets it up for the well to be a good place to deconstruct. Okay?
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear this.
Okay, cool. Things I think Danny has done that are nice. How you handle the giving conversation.
Oh, yeah. Do you want to say more about that? Are you going to like unpack these at all?
I guess I can a little bit. Is, I don't know, just like the lack of like no obligation, like you saying very specifically, like giving does not make you more in than someone who doesn't give. Like, I don't know. Some things you just say a lot when it comes to the topic of giving that I haven't heard said in church before. You really lift up others' voices, and it's like a joy. It's not like well, I guess we need someone else.
Yeah, okay.
I guess we need someone to fill this spot. Like you do it like real. You're not just doing it for show. I love when you tell the congregation that they can disagree with you. Never in any church that I've been to have I heard like you can disagree with me.
I will tell you though, so that's like one of my values, especially in talking. We talked about origin stories financially, but like that was something I remember being told early I couldn't disagree, and I've maybe overcorrected. I don't know if it's a negative overcorrection, but for sure a recorrection. Mm-hmm. But it's funny when I look at people in the congregation. Sometimes like a lot of people are for it, and some people are like, I just want.
Right, just tell me.
Just tell me what to believe, which is funny to me.
Yeah. I think your partnership / friendship with Rabbi Joshua and bringing him out to teach was lovely. And then this is the last one is like sometimes you'll quote other faith traditions or religions like in the same sermon.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
Yeah. Most recently, Buddha.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't remember the quote, but I read it and I was like, I think Jesus sort of said this. And I was like, why would we not read this?
Right.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And I would say I did not write any down, but I do think you've done a good job in that as well, in the sense that like one of the things you do better than most people that I've seen is you are very sensitive to the stories of the individuals around you, in the sense that like a lot of times in your role, people are cogs in the machine, especially a church like ours that's like small but growing. And I think like we have a lot of growth ahead of us, and it's like we want to stay ahead of that. And so it's really easy to turn people into chess pieces in parts of the machine. And I think you've done a really good job like caring for your people in that way, like knowing their story. And like I can get annoyed sometimes on Sundays. I'm like, they will just not stop chit chatting, and like we got to get through this rehearsal. But I think back and like I'll sit and I'll be like, you know what, like this is what that group of people needs. It's like they need to be seen, heard, laugh, and see that faith can be fun more than we need to like not mess up during the songs. And reality, like for anyone that doesn't go to the church, you guys like rarely mess things up. So it's not like there's a connection between excellence. Like, and I would say like I value excellence, but that's not something we've even elevated as a value, because I've seen churches do that and they do it. It really
makes it weird.
Yeah, it's weird. I've never seen a church say it in a way that actually sounds valuable.
Yeah.
And you value excellence, I think, very highly, but you also value like relationships above that. And so I would say like you've done a really good job like understanding first, being a pastor isn't just like preaching. Like being a pastor is like saying, hey, like I'm here for you people, and not just in coffee, but like in everyday life. So you do a good job at that.
Thanks.
Yeah. Wow, this turned into a big love fest.
Wow.
Well, with that in mind, I think I'll wrap us up.
Okay.
But this was fun. I don't know that we touched everything that we could have or I thought we would, but I think it was, for anyone that's listening, like maybe this was a more helpful conversation for like the pastors, staff, or like anyone leading volunteers, in the sense that it's like, one, most of us probably had something that hurt us at some point, or deconstruction. And then maybe now we're on the other side and we're like, we don't see as clearly where we were. And even just having the conversation like opens up blind spots for us. And like, oh, like I didn't even think about it. I could see in our conversation things you said, but those things that were like peaked in my mind. I'm like, oh, like I do that and I don't even want to do that. Or I didn't try to do that.
Yeah.
And positively, like the giving conversation, like that's an overcorrection that has helped some people in our congregation. And like, so yeah, I don't know. Any final words for us?
I think that if you're listening and you're not a pastor, just know that you can push back against your pastors too. Or if you want to say something or talk to them, they're just people.
Yeah. Well, I said this in the sermon this Sunday. I was talking about generosity, and I was like making something about saving and spending. And I was like, just so you guys know, like I'm still working on this too.
Yeah.
And I don't have it all figured out. And it's like, pastors don't always say that, but if they don't, just so anyone listening knows, they don't. No pastor's figured it all out. Like I heard a guy say on TikTok, he was driving his other pastor friend home, and he was like, you just pretend like you're perfect and like you have it all together, and like I'm struggling with these things, and I just wish you would stop pretending and tell people. And he's like, well, I'm not struggling with anything. Like I've been fully sanctified by Jesus.
Oh,
like, no, you haven't.
Oh no.
Like I get it, and like you're crushing it, and you're probably not like watching porn, and you're not doing all the things that like your buddy was doing or whatever. But it's like you still are struggling with things.
Yeah.
And you still have, and like it does no one any good to pretend like you're something you're not.
Right. Yeah. Like if you don't think that you have any struggles, maybe like look inward.
Yeah. And I think that's even to this conversation. It's like for any pastors that were now on this side of the table, it's like, just don't pretend like you're something you're not. Like that is a huge word of encouragement. And I think that will be more life-giving than you think pretending like you're perfect will be.
Wow. Can I quote mega pastor Craig Groeschel?
Oh, yeah. I love Craig.
Craig Groeschel says that people would rather follow a leader that's real than one that's always right. Play the music.
And with that, don't forget to embrace the journey.
And the journey.
We got to work on this.
Sorry, do you snap after?
Yeah.
Oh.